Hello and welcome to our Getting Started with AnzoGraph DB short video. Thank you for your interest in AnzoGraph. We're excited to share how to get started. And my name is Thomas Cook, and I'll be leading you through today's presentation. The agenda, we'll be taking a look at deployment options and prerequisites for deploying AnzoGraph DB, how to run the database, looking at the admin console, upgrading the license, and also running our Zeppelin data science notebooks, which is the main user interface or developer interface that we provide. So the different deployment options currently available for AnzoGraph is Docker Community Edition, Kubernetes with Helm, Red Hat, CentOS Tarball, or AWS CloudFormation services. Today, we'll be looking at Docker Community Edition. This is one of the simplest ways to get up and running across different platforms, Windows, Linux, Mac, etc. In later videos, we may show how to get up and running with Kubernetes or the Linux Tarball or some of the other deployment options. But today, we'll take a look at the Docker deployment. The minimum requirements for running Docker are 8 gigabytes of RAM, but we do recommend 16 gigs or more. You can run on Mac OS, Linux, or Windows 10 Professional or Enterprise Edition. Docker is not supported on Windows Home Edition, Windows 10 Home Edition, so that's a Docker limitation. We also require Docker Community Edition version 18 or later, at least 10 gigabytes of available disk space, and a minimum of 2 CPUs, but 4 or more are recommended. Because we are a massively scalable graph database, we can leverage all the CPUs and all of the RAM available across the system, a single system or across a cluster. Today we'll be looking at the free edition, how to download the free edition, upgrade from 8 gigabytes to 16 gigabytes, but you also have the enterprise edition as an option as well, where you can install it on a single server and scale up beyond 16 gigabytes of RAM, or install it across a cluster as well and have your data parallelized across as many nodes for a trial. So these are the different download steps. If you go to AnzoGraphDB.com, AnzoGraph.com, and click on the download, which I'll walk you through the process, but these are 4 main steps that we'll be going through today. So the first thing we'll do is install and configure Docker. I'm not going to walk you through all of that. The details are there in the documentation. We'll assume that you have Docker up and running. We'll talk a little bit about the configuration. Once that's done, we'll download and run the AnzoGraph Docker container. So this will be the database running inside a Docker container. Then we'll go and upgrade from the free version to the 16 gigabyte free edition, or you can also upgrade to the 60-day enterprise edition trial if you're interested in that. And then last, we'll run a Zeppelin Docker container and connect it to AnzoGraph DB and run some of the sample Zeppelin notebooks. So switching gears here, I'll open a web browser here to AnzoGraph.com. And here you can see our landing page. And if you click on this link down here at the bottom, it says Get AnzoGraph DB. You can choose free edition. You can click on register for free edition, or you can simply go to the unregistered free edition here. If you register, you'll provide your email address. So provide the email address and click submit. Let's see. Now here are the various steps that you'll walk through the process. So step 1, installing Docker. Step 2, running the AnzoGraph Docker container. 3, upgrading, and 4, running Zeppelin. So if I click on install Docker, that will take me to our documentation pages that tell you how to set up Docker on your system. There's instructions for Mac, Linux, and Windows. You want to walk through these and make sure that your system is configured correctly. The main thing you want to be aware of here is that Docker requires a certain amount of resources. If you're running AnzoGraph, We require at least 8 gigabytes of RAM and 10 gigabytes of available disk space. So you'll need to make those settings here in the Docker configuration files. Okay. If I go back to our instructions, so we assume that Docker is up and running. We'll next go to step 2, which is installing AnzoGraph, the container. And now we have separate instructions for Mac, Linux, and Windows, but these would all be Docker running on Mac or Linux or Windows. So the instructions actually, once it's inside of the Docker container, those instructions are the same. But here I'm using a Mac, so I'll click on Mac. In our first step here, it says Docker pull, and then the name of our container. Okay, so it's Cambridge Semantics, AnzoGraph, and the tag is latest. We update the database pretty regularly, and you can actually go out to Docker Hub and take a look at the different versions of the database and our release history. You can even change this tag here and pull out previous versions and that type of thing if you wanted, if you had some reason to do that. But here I'll open up a terminal. So you'll open up a new terminal. Okay, so here I am. I've copied this Docker command. So you select this, copy it, then go to your terminal screen and paste that in the window here. And that will pull the Docker command, that will pull the Docker container image from the Docker Hub down to your local machine. I already have it downloaded here, but you'll see that will, you'll see it downloading on your system when you execute that command. Next is running it. And here is the format of that run command. So we can see here Docker run, and then there's a host port, and then the port inside the Docker. There's also a name. You can specify a container name, so you can give it different names. If you had different versions of AnzoGraph running, you may want to give it different names or something along those lines. And you can also specify the tag here. But down at the bottom, we'll grab this example. This should work unless you need to change your port numbers. So here we're using port 80 and port 443 on the host system. For some reason, if you have something already running on one of these two ports, you can simply change these two numbers on your system. But I'll just grab this command here. It should work out of the box. Again, assuming you don't have anything running there. And I'll paste it into my terminal and hit enter. And then we see a container ID appear here. So that shows us that it launched it. There's no errors. I can also open the Docker dashboard. So in Mac, to get to the Docker dashboard, you go up here to the top and you select the Docker icon and select dashboard. Okay, and here you can see the different Docker images I have, and Docker containers that are running are in the green. So here I see AnzoGraph. You'll notice the name that we gave it was just AnzoGraph. And so that's the image, that's the container that is running inside of my system. If I go back here to our instructions, it tells us we can either pull up this IP address, or you can actually click on this little icon in the Docker dashboard to pull up the admin console. So here we're just going to pull up this IP address here, the local host. You can actually just type in local host if you want. And this brings up our end user license agreement. If you want to download that, you can download that, but you'll need to accept in order to use the database. And then you'll enter the password, the user and password, which are shown here. The username and password. The username is admin and password is capital P, password with a 0 and a 1 at the end. Okay, so enter those in. It looks like they were already entered, and so we skipped that step on my system. It looked like they got saved. So this brings us into the admin console, and our query console is shown here. So there's some sample queries, count statements, and total statements, which will show you the number of triples in the database by graph. and the total number of triples in the database. To run these, you can just simply click on Run. If I click that, you can see the results of there's 0 results because we haven't loaded any data into the database yet, but we'll do that next. But if I click here on this admin tab, I go over to our admin console, and here I can see, okay, there we go. So here, once the admin tab appears, if we want to upgrade our license, we can click on Upgrade License. And this gives us an option to get a upgraded 16 gigabyte license if we did not select that. We selected that when we went through the download page, but you can also just download directly from Docker Hub or bypassing the registration and start with the 8 gigabyte license. To upgrade to the 16 gigabyte license, you can click here or get the 60-day free trial for the Enterprise Edition. So those are your different options there. So I'll enter my email address here, click Submit. So I already have an account, so I'll sign into the account. You may have to register with your account. Here we accept the license agreement again. We hit OK. Now, this is my generated license key. Okay, there's a server ID that's associated with your server, so the license ID will only run on your server. That's why this has to be executed through the AnzoGraph admin console, because it generates a server ID, and now this license file is specific to your email address and your server. So you can copy this by selecting this copy button here. So we copy that and we go back to our AnzoGraph admin, and then over here in the top left, we can go to product license. We select that and we can paste our license key in here that we just copied from the other page, and then select apply. Right now you can see our max RAM is at 8 gigabytes. So here our max RAM is set at 8 gigabytes, and when I hit this apply, our max RAM has been upgraded to 16 gigabytes. Okay, the license file was updated successfully. We hit close, and now we have a 16 gigabyte license now available for us to use. So that is upgrading your AnzoGraph license. And our last step that we want to do is install the Zeppelin data science notebooks and the container and the sample notebooks. So we'll click on Install Zeppelin. And here we can just capture this Docker pull command. The first thing that we need to do is just pull the Docker image down from Docker Hub. So I execute that. My image is already up to date. On your system, you'll see it downloading. And here we want to create a couple directories. So we create a logs and a notebook directory. So I copy these commands and run these. This is where the logs and the notebooks for Zeppelin will be saved on your local system. So when we execute the Zeppelin container, we will specify where those notebooks are created. So here I have two options. I can deploy Zeppelin without the sample notebooks, or I can deploy Zeppelin with the sample notebooks included. Well, we provide a number of different data science notebooks, sample notebooks, tutorial notebooks on all the different data science functions, over 40 different data science functions and 40 different tutorial notebooks. So I recommend you check out the Zeppelin with the sample notebooks included. And to do that, you can just simply grab this Docker run command. And here I'm calling it Zeppelin, and there's some other parameters that we're passing in. we're specifying the notebook directory, the log directory, and some other things. The image that we're pulling is Cambridge Semantics contrib-zeppelin latest, and then we're executing this script when we run the container. But you simply just copy this command and paste it into your terminal, and then you hit enter, and you can see the container ID get created there. There aren't any errors, so that is a positive sign. I can go back to my Docker dashboard and check out if that's running. So here I can see AnzoGraph and Zeppelin are both up and running. You can click on Zeppelin, and then you can take a look here at the Docker log. So this shows you, this is a log of everything that's happening inside the container as it's starting up. And so here you can see a number of different tutorial notebooks and that type of thing getting loaded, etc. And so if we go back to our documentation, the next step, it says when the deployment is complete, open Zeppelin by going to the following URL in your browser. It says host IP address, or we can simply use localhost as well. So I'll just go to open up a new browser here, a new tab in my browser, and I'll do localhost port 8080. So the AnzoGraph admin console is running on port 80, and Zeppelin's running on port 8080. So I hit enter, and here I can see the Zeppelin notebooks. Okay, I will increase the size here to make this a little bit easier for people to read. So the first one is our getting started notebook, and then you see a number of different data science notebooks. You can click on each one of these for a very extensive notebook, tutorial notebook that talks you through how to use each of these different distributions and correlations, the different graph algorithms, feature exploration with principal component analysis and profiling metrics, etc. So the first thing we need to do in order to use Zeppelin is configure it to point to AnzoGraph. So if I go back to the documentation, here it tells me how to do that. So connecting to AnzoGraph is the next section underneath. And here is a command. The first thing I need to do is I need to get the IP address of my AnzoGraph container. So it can be different on different systems. So we give you a command here that you can execute to pull that to pull that IP address. So here we say docker inspect container name and then grep for IP address. Okay. If you're not familiar with Docker, I recommend you take a look at some of the tutorials online or Google for the Docker cheat sheet to see what some of these commands are for the Docker to get a better grip on using Docker. But here we do docker inspect, so we can simply copy this command. We go back to our console, we paste this in here. Because our container name was AnzoGraph, it's going to execute this inspect statement, which gives a lot of information about the AnzoGraph container, and one of those is the IP address. So we copy this IP address. Now I go back to my Zeppelin container, my Zeppelin notebook here, and in the top right corner is where I configure this. So where it says anonymous, I click here, I choose interpreter, and I search for the Sparkle interpreter. So SPARQL is our Sparkle interpreter. This is a custom interpreter that we built that connects directly to AnzoGraph and allows you to type Sparkle queries directly into the cells or paragraphs of Zeppelin. Okay, so now I see it and I click on this edit button. So I change localhost to the value that I copied. So I paste my IP address in there. Now the password, remember, is capital P A S S W 0 RD1, and our user is admin. Okay, that was the AnzoGraph user and password that we entered earlier to get into the admin console. And that's all we do. So we update the IP address for the host name, the user, and password, and then we select save. It says, do we want to update the container and restart? We say yes, and then we go back to our, each one of these Zeppelin notebooks is simply a web page where you can execute code. These are very popular in the data science community in terms of building data discovery and building different data science notebooks to communicate how to parse data, how to communicate different data data analysis results. So if I click on the Getting Started guide, this is our Zeppelin tutorial, our beginner tutorial. There's a lot of information in the beginning about connecting to S3 buckets and loading data. If you scroll down here, you'll get to your first command. It's in the section of loading the ticket data. So some of the data that we give is, some of the sample data we give is called the ticket data set. And here it says import the ticket data in the notebook, okay? And this is the code to execute that. And you simply put your cursor inside of this cell. So this is the cell that's selected, and you can click on this run icon, or you can hit Shift Enter to execute this. So what it's doing is it's dropping the graph called ticket. If there was a ticket graph that existed already, it will drop it. In our case, the database is empty, so that will not do anything. And then we're loading from an S3 bucket. So this will come off of one of Cambridge Semantics S3 buckets, is this ticket data set, and it's a turtle file in a gzip format, and it's loading it into graph ticket. So I will just simply execute that. And it says started a few seconds ago, so we have an update here. But each one of these cells can be executed. You can run the entire notebook all at once with the commands on the top. There's two different types of cells that you see. Some of these are what we call markdown, so you can put in HTML code and documentation and images and different things like that to help communicate what your data analysis is doing in the data science notebook. That's really the power of the data science notebooks, also to be able to interactively run snippets of code and save those and share those with other people. So here we can see the query executed successfully. It took 35 seconds to load that data set, and now we can visualize some of the sample data. So this is a markdown cell where it says visualize the sample data. If you double click on that, you can see how the markdown was created. So %MD specifies it's a markdown cell. %Sparkle specifies that's the keyword for the Sparkle cell. And so when I run this markdown, it produces the documentation output. Okay, you can see the results there. The first time you run a query, it can take a little bit longer because of the compile time, but the second time you run it, it will be much, much faster. So you see it took about 14 seconds the first time, and then less than 1 second the second time. And that's just simply because it's computing it's building out the query. So you can look at all these different sample queries, sample visualizations. These buttons down here at the bottom allow you to do different types of visualizations, from bar charts to pie charts, line charts, scatter plots, etc. You can see different examples of those here. So this is our Getting Started notebook. Again, this is just getting up and running with AnzoGraph, and there's many others. If we go back to our table of contents, you can click here to get back to the main page, or you can go back and you can see each one of these has a very detailed notebook. If we take a look at the Bernoulli distribution, we can go and look at how some of these. One thing I'll point out is sometimes the editor gets hidden, and so we can't see the query here. So if you click on this show editor icon, that will pop the editor back open so you can see that. So if you're not familiar with Zeppelin, that may be helpful. But here you can see the Bernoulli distribution and how that is applied, and you can apply these different data science functions We have about 40 data science functions, and we're adding to these all the time. And so that is getting up and running with AnzoGraph. There's a couple of other things I wanted to mention to you. What makes AnzoGraph so powerful, and why has it become such a popular database for graph analytics? And these are some of the reasons. We are the fastest and most scalable graph database on the market today. Our MPP platform, it's a distributed, massively parallel in-memory database that makes it extremely fast for very large scale graph analytics. We've scaled up to 200 nodes in a Google cluster for some of the benchmarks that we've published on our website, and you can download those benchmarks and see how we compare to other databases out there. We also have the fastest loading. We can leverage every core of every CPU across a cluster to load data. Extremely fast loading, which is really important in certain use cases to get the data into the database so we can analyze it more quickly. So if you need to load very large data sets very quickly, we're definitely, that is definitely a very good strength of ours. We also have the deepest analytics from graph algorithms, BI, data warehouse style analytics, inferencing, data science, feature engineering, and we're adding many, many more. Some exciting features are coming up in the coming releases in the next coming months, and we'll be sharing more of these short videos on those features with you. But we're also built entirely upon standards, so Sparkle, RDF, and Sparkle Star and RDF Star for labeled property graph support. We're also adding Cypher support, and there's a limited edition of that available in the download today, so you can try out some of the Cypher features. Not the full language has not been implemented, but it should be within the coming months. And the last thing I'll say is that we've been taking a look at the free edition. There's also an enterprise edition that you can download for a 60-day free trial. This can scale to any size, and we also offer free support during your trial. If you need support using the free edition, we prefer that you use Stack Overflow. There's a AnzoGraph tag set up there, so please post your questions to Stack Overflow, and we do monitor that. But if you're doing an enterprise edition trial, please reach out to us. We're happy to support you to make sure that you see the value of AnzoGraph. Any questions, please email info.anzograph@cambridgesemantics.com, and also visit anzograph.com for more information. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please look forward to more of these short videos from us. Thank you.